Hi, and welcome to A Critical Conversation with 100 Days to Zero Waste.
Hi, I'm Jesse.
I'm Jen.
And I'm Sasha.
And these are the contestants from 100 Days to Zero Waste. So the contestants have brought up issues they've been having as well as concerns they've been having about what this means in a larger context, what it means to go zero waste, and also wanted to talk about the challenges they've been facing. So let's have the conversation.
It's been really great, but I'm sort of at a point where I'm emotionally probably a little oversaturated, and so I'm trying to figure out how to sort through some of the frustrations. I recently went abroad. I went on vacation, and not to brag or anything, but I had the chance to see some really beautiful landscapes and beautiful beaches, and I did some snorkeling, and which was awesome. But also in those experiences, I realized that I was constantly surrounded by trash, and I'm sort of, through doing this challenge, I think it has desensitized me to some of the visuals that are constantly around us. So if we all actually open our eyes, we'll see that there's trash and plastic everywhere. And so while snorkeling, when I thought I was seeing a beautiful jellyfish, it turned out that it was just a floating plastic bag. Or like seeing the beach at the end of the day, after people have sort of made do with it what they wanted. Or even having interactions with people and trying to refuse straws or trying to refuse plastic cups and being looked at as some sort of a snob. Right now, I'm like a little frustrated by all these things, and I would pick up things from the beach. I would pick up things out of the ocean and bring trash and try to dispose of it in a responsible way, and look up and see so much more. And then I'm just one person, and it made me feel totally helpless, and it almost made me feel kind of pointless in what I'm trying to do. So, but then you think about like, what if 50 other people did the same thing and picked up 5 pieces? And yeah, right now
So that's how whole movements get started.
It seems like a lot of the disconnect we're having right now is between this individual and the collective, and we all want to be part of the collective, but at the same time, zero waste so far has been a very individualized movement and a very Western movement as well, and that's where that mindset comes from of like, okay, like, what can I do with just me? And so it is about taking action, but at the same time, it's been so individualized, and I think we need to kind of ideate on how can we move from this individual mindset to this collective mindset so we don't have that disconnect. What do you guys think? Any ideas on how we might approach that challenge?
Well, I think the social media helps a lot. The more each of us posts about that, every person has their own wave of people that they influence. So it's using your voice and using your example, and just being able to stand comfortably in what you're doing. I keep hearing from a lot of people that they're really impressed by what we're doing,
yes.
and they're inspired. And so they go and they can't unsee it now. Like once you see it, you can't unsee it. And then you start realizing, I need to help pick this up, things like that. So
Yeah, especially because like we are sort of fighting like a downhill fight, like what we're talking about, where it's like you pick up one piece of trash and somewhere in another part of the world, 500 plastic bottles were just, blow molded in like a few seconds. And so it's like, you kind of have to like have other people around you, because otherwise you really are just like going against like lunch tycoons, and it would be, it's like, it still feels like a very impossible battle. But yeah, having like just people sort of come up to you and like be very impressed and like proud, it's been very helpful for me to see other people be proud, because it's hard to be proud of yourself, sometimes, like, but for other people to remind me that like what I'm doing is as hard as it really is, has been very encouraging.
It seems that we need to go forward remembering then that our voices are the most important aspect of this, not maybe each popcorn container that we try to save ourselves from. And I would like to move from that into, and also like talking about what your experience was traveling as well this past week, how this plays into a global context. Because if we're talking about the collective, like trash is a world problem. It's not just a me problem. And so, can you guys talk about like your experience with zero waste in Portugal?
Yeah, absolutely. So I went to Portugal. I spent like a day in Lisbon and a few days in Porto, and was there with like my sister and her boyfriend and both of our families. And I was definitely noticing that like, you know, transit zero waste is like impossible unless on the day-to-day I can bring the food with me that I need because I have the groceries, I have the boxes, or like the mason jars. But when you're traveling, you don't have your pantry at the end of the day to reset. So I kind of run out of these things, like the zero waste sort of kits that I have with me, and I can't really replenish them because when you're at an airport, they don't have ways to do that. They might have some peanuts, but they're in their own plastic bags. So sort of while at airports, while taking trains, zero waste it's nearly impossible unless you were to bring a massive backpack that could sustain you for the 2 day. Like I eat a lot, so like I can't physically hold all the food I would want until I can get to that next grocery store. So that was tough. Also being in Portugal. I was there the weekend of like basically Easter, so there's a Spanish holiday, so there was a ton of Spaniards in Portugal, so I was able to use some Spanish to speak with people, as well as, you know, there was a decent amount of English speakers. But besides like the language barrier, just the cultural disconnect of not being able to, I'm trying to explain to them that I'm a vegetarian, even though I'd really prefer to be a vegan, but like I couldn't even dream about explaining that to them. So trying to communicate what I needed from people with a language barrier was one thing, but then them just not knowing what it even meant to be a vegetarian, let alone vegan, let alone zero waste. Like what even, like no one knows what that is. It was pretty impossible to sort of get by. I mean, people didn't give me straws, so I got lucky, but you know, that's such a small part of it.
And I think that this is where we run into problems because it's not about me against the world, it's me for the world. And it ends up being like this privileged kind of image and also this idea of like, this is the choices I've made, and like in an effort to not impose on your friends or your community or other cultures too, it's like, oh wait, I will change all my ideals and beliefs right now. Because like you come in with a set way of doing things that don't apply to other cultural contexts. So I think we need to figure out like, okay, how can we define what zero waste means in another cultural context? Because it can still exist, but it won't mean like. And you need to present it.
You need to present it in like a very appropriate way so that you're not insulting someone's culture. Because in Portugal, where they love their meat and their seafood, to tell them that I'm a vegetarian, I got like chefs that like would be insulted and would take it personally. So to figure out how to sort of explain, it's like this is like almost like for the world, but not come across in any sort of negative light or be imposing or insulting, given our privileged perspective, as like a tourist in someone else's country.
Yeah, and being inclusive rather than exclusive.
Yes, so I was in Brazil and I was in Rio de Janeiro, and for the most part I was able to fend off a lot of plastic straws and cups, but in many instances I wasn't given a choice. Like if I was at a restaurant, all of a sudden a plastic cup of water with a plastic straw would be in front of me. Or on the plane, I either had to choose not to eat or eat like a ton of trail mix, which I became sick of. Or I would say, okay, just give me the one thing and not the rest of the tray, which is all packaged in plastic and gets trashed. So my frustration was that having a choice was almost impossible. And again, I had to constantly go against the grain. I was trying to get like a smoothie drink and had a translation on the phone. I'm like, no plastic spoon, no plastic cup. And people looked at me like I'm a crazy alien. And I could tell they were frustrated and angry.
I think you used this word choice, which is so important to come back to, because we are like people with the most choices in the world. And if we feel like in an aspect of trying to make change that okay, I don't have a choice, that like disempowerment, it extends like throughout the whole world. And so maybe instead of focusing on each action, like, okay, I produced waste this lunch, you know, we need to go forward and change like the way that that we approach this in terms of like, okay, how can I think about the fact that I don't feel like I have a choice right now? How can I make there be a choice, or how can I ask for a choice instead of just saying like, no, I'm not going to take it? Is that really about voice again? Is that really the way that you're using voice? So I think like right now this is our individual like trash fast, right? Our like sort of silent protest about it, but maybe we need to make that a louder protest. I know you've been doing a lot of activism in the community, so related to trash. So I'm wondering how this Zero Waste Challenge and that activism kind of come together, and where you felt like are interlimited.
So my activism, I'm a member of Climate Action Rhode Island and the Sierra Club, and I have my own project called the Whale Guitar Project, and reducing single-use plastic is also about fossil fuels, and it's also about climate change, because all of these plastic products are made from fossil fuels, basically. So the manufacture of them, it needs a lot of energy, and so all these problems are interrelated. Even the plastics in the ocean warm the ocean. We haven't done like a zero trash march. Can you imagine? Like some of the trashiest events that you'll ever go to are a march. You know, everybody makes signs and then they just leave them everywhere. And so it would be a challenge, but a good one. I think I'd like to see it happen, maybe make it happen. What would a zero trash march look like? There's been a lot of work in Providence to ban the plastic bag, and that's an interesting story because it almost got passed, but it failed because the members, in terms of environmental justice, we talk about climate action a lot, but we forget to talk about climate justice. And so the underprivileged communities weren't represented in the legislation. And it was centered around a 10-cent fine to buy a bag if you forgot to bring your bag, which doesn't seem like a lot to us. 10 cents isn't a lot to us, but to somebody who is barely scraping together a living, 10 cents is 10 cents. So, and in Newport, which banned the bag, there isn't the same negative incentive to comply. So people were upset that in a community that has so much underprivilege, this fine they tried to put the fine in place, when, you know, maybe what they should have done is like, for every bag you bring back, you get a nickel or something, so that they could have created almost an economy around bags, and then maybe places would magically start to clean up because there would be a value to picking up those bags. So I have a friend who makes these beautiful little kits that have the bamboo forks and knives, and they have a little straw in them, so you can roll that up and take that with you.
That also
to
doesn't
work for
feel
your
like
lunch.
necessarily where we should be going, because I think that still keeps us on an individual level, and that's why instinctively it feels like, oh no, that's not really a long-term solution. A lot of the things that we're doing right now in this 100-day challenge feel like, I don't know if this is a long-term solution or an everybody solution. It's kind of a way, it's kind of like a lifestyle protest, you know, because it's not yet a systems thinking approach. So in thinking about building this as more of a movement, what kinds of models are out there that we can base a lot of our ideas off of or move forward off of?
My sort of response to that is understanding this as a movement is almost movements are very difficult. It requires it requires activism and these sort of things, and people sometimes can be resistant to that. Again, like this idea of like balancing your voice. Like if you want to make it a movement, some people they're like there are so many movements out there that it seems like you're then competing. A lot of these problems that we have right now is a lack of financial incentive. We only started using single-use Coca-Cola bottles made of plastic in like the 90s. Like prior to the 90s, they came in glass. Like it wasn't an issue. It was just that plastic bottles were cheaper.
Making the financial case ultimately is where a lot of this comes down to, just because that is how we live and how people are limited in our capitalist society.
Yeah, you just have to make it appealing to the right people. Like there are people like us who will find this protest appealing and will choose to do it, and can get a few others on board. But there are others that will find this idea disgusting or uninteresting, and we have to present it to them in a way that is appealing. So sometimes that might be financial, other times it might be a social media presence and brand growth. Like you have to, bring value, unfortunately, to this movement in order for it to catch on. And so if people don't understand the value, if they haven't seen the plastic in the oceans, we have to make it digestible.
And I think what's really important too is this double meaning to everything, or triple meaning, or like, what does a water bottle mean? It doesn't only mean the fact that you have plastic there, which was drawn out of like petroleum, which already comes from this globalized movement. It also means ownership of water, because it's been in a water bottle that was stolen from the Himalayas or somewhere where people weren't able to speak up against it. So if you're choosing not to buy that water bottle, it's not just about choosing not to use that plastic and not contribute to plastic waste. It's also about so many more things, about kind of saying no to all these systems that have been set up.
Right, like we've developed these incredible systems in these cities that deliver water in your tap. It's amazing. All you have to do is you turn a faucet and you can have drinking water. And a lot of the times it's cleaner or, it's as clean or cleaner than what you buy in a water bottle. So like the idea that you need to carry this water around with you when it can just come out of the tap in so many places, it doesn't make sense a lot of the times.
And for the places where we have water problems, then focusing our efforts on developing proper or administering proper filtration and treatment. So actually, I think that's all we're gonna wrap up with today for this conversation. Obviously, there's a lot to get into, but I'm glad that we could have this talk. So thank you guys so much for really putting yourselves out there and going through all of these challenges and being willing to take this on and step up as activists.
Thank you.
That's it for a critical conversation with 100 Days to Zero Waste. Thank you for joining us, and we'll see you next time.